let me talk about critical race theory. Across this entire country, you've had states like Texas, Idaho, and others pass laws banning the teaching of critical race theory. You have a band of Karens who have launched assaults against school boards, saying, don't teach our children critical race theory. Here's the reality of it, ladies and gentlemen. K through 12 education does not teach critical race theory. As a matter of fact, colleges, undergrad, they don't even teach critical race theory. It's considered to be an advanced theoretical framework. Graduate level classes typically will teach critical race theory if you're taking particular courses. Now, why are they saying they are banning critical race theory? Don't fall for the okie dokie. See, I'm from Glenwood Road. I peep game. They're simply running game on Republicans, moderates, independents, and trying to run game on those on the left. But it doesn't work here. We are immune to game. CRT, critical race theory, has been around since the 70s. It's not a new concept. It is a derivative of the legal scholarship concept, which examined racism as it correlates to systems, institutions, policies, not just people. In other words, if you eliminated or decreased the number of individual racist people in America, you would still have to contend with the fact that you have racist policies and racist norms connected to institutions. Let me give you another example. The US Constitution called me 3/5 of a person. That's called an institutional racist norm. The Declaration of Independence, another founding document of our nation, called Native Americans savages. That's an institutional racist norm. Those institutions continue to permeate today. Critical race theory, ladies and gentlemen, not taught in K through 12 education. There is no school teacher who has ever taught this in K through 12 education. As a matter of fact, when you went to high school, did you learn critical race theory? Of course not. This is a fabricated pretext in order to create a context to stop critical thinking, not critical theory. That's what this is all about. The bills that have been proposed and the bills that have been passed do not contain the verbiage critical race theory. Isn't that something? They don't have the verbiage that says CRT. They do say race, racism, racial, and even sexism. Those words are inside of these bills. The fabricated pretext is critical race theory to create the context to serve an agenda that says, let's stop thinking critically about what white racist lawmakers did in this country. That's what this is about. Let me give you another example of how Republicans have played this game before. Remember the weapons of mass destruction? Remember that? Once again, a fabricated pretext in order to create a context to serve their agenda. Most recent, massive voter fraud. Another fabricated pretext to create a context for them to serve their agenda, to eliminate or decrease your ability to have access to the ballot if you are black, brown, or poor. Ladies and gentlemen, we got a lot to talk about even beyond that. I got a segment coming up called I Wish a Karen Would. Karens are dangerous, ladies and gentlemen, detrimental to the progression of this society. We'll talk about Karens on this show as well. Before I get to that, let me bring on my big homie, somebody I have a lot of admiration and respect for. We got Cenk Uygur, my big homie. What's going on, brother?
Hey, Rashad. First of all, let me just say, it is just a pleasure to have Rashad Richey on the TYT network. It is just fantastic. And you lived up to the name of the show instantly. All these articles I've read about, it's a critical race theory that's being taught, etc. But wait a minute, it isn't taught. Okay, and that's just a fact. It's just a fact. Yet it's not in any of the articles. Why? The conservatives framed it as they're teaching critical race theory and we're passing bills against teaching critical race theory when it's just not true. So that we have to establish that before we even get to the real issues. And I love that I'm on your show on our network. Okay, but I want to dive into the issue because I think that it's interesting on many fronts. First of all, on the point that you made, so if the Republican bills mention the words race, racism, sexism, etc., does that mean that we're not going to be allowed to teach about race in this country? How can you possibly teach the history of America without mentioning race? It's as Rashad just pointed out, it's in the founding documents. And get a load of the irony of the guys who said we should not take down the Confederate statues because we'd be erasing history. Now passing legislation to literally erase history from the textbooks. So it's when you're celebrating Confederate generals, all of a sudden you want to celebrate that portion of history. But when you want to talk about what actually happened in this country about race and yes, racism, all of a sudden you don't want to celebrate history. And all of a sudden you're looking to cancel certain portions of history because you find it inconvenient. So let's just acknowledge that right out of the gate.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. And what they're trying to do, Cenk, is go back to a 1950s style of education of America in classrooms. And what that did was it created a propaganda mechanism. The way we taught American history and American reality in the 1950s was basically a public relations machine. We taught our students, children, that America was good and everybody else was actually evil, that America could do no wrong and America was right because it was America. And I would dare to argue that patriotism has nothing to do with a cult-like following. If you are a true patriot, you're able to give tough love when necessary in order to make sure that the country you actually do love and care for makes and becomes everything it can be.
Yeah, and so I want to take it a little bit further too, because building on the point you just made, you know the old saying, winners write the history books, right? And that is exactly right. And so unfortunately, in the old days in America, and this is just a fact, the winners were the racists. So when you have founding fathers who, by the way, I respect in other ways, and I thought they did an amazing job with the United States Constitution, but they were slaveholders. Yeah. So they wrote in slavery basically into the Constitution. They wrote away the humanity of black people into the Constitution. Now, luckily, they also provided 4 amendments, and so that was amended later. But you can't deny that history. And the winners writing the history books basically do that. They say, we're just gonna erase that part. And so, and look, guys, history is complicated. So Robert McNamara was, before he became Secretary of Defense during the Vietnam War and committed atrocities there, he was part of the people who planned the firebombing of Dresden and Tokyo in World War II. And he said something that was true. He said, look, if we lose the war, we're all going to be tried as war criminals because we're killing hundreds of thousands of civilians. We're burning them alive, okay? Now, it was a great cause to defeat the Nazis, but we did it in a horrific way, okay? In Imperial Japan. So that is complicated, it is nuanced, and you need to study all of it, and you can't erase any of it if you want to understand it. And the same thing applies, obviously, not just to slavery, but to how African Americans have been treated in this country for time immemorial. And look, I'll give you one thing that just happened a couple of days ago. I saw a documentary about Greenwood, the massacre in Tulsa, and look, I've known that story for a long time. We've talked about it on the Young Turks for a long time. But there was something that really struck me in the documentary. It was someone who had survived it as a kid, and she explained how she never wanted to talk about it. She still didn't want to talk about it, not because it was too emotionally painful, but because she was so worried, and it was ingrained in black culture at the time, so worried that if you said it out loud, it would happen again. That that white folks would get so mad they'd come and lynch you again. And so if you think about it, and if you're being honest, that is an extreme form of terrorism.
Yeah.
And black folks in this country, through the not just slavery, but lynching, Jim Crow, et cetera, were terrorized. They were so afraid to even speak of their family members being brutally massacred for fear of what would happen. So now, if we taught that version of history, white people, folks, honestly, they would lose their minds. Because you just use the word terrorism in relation to what happened in America. Now the reality is that is what happened. That is what happened. Yeah. Right. And this is not that. This is a much, much milder form of an obvious fact. And even then they're saying, how dare you teach what actually happened?
Yeah, and it's amazing, right, that these individuals who are supposed to be stewards of history when it comes to white bigoted culture against black and brown people in America, those that will say things like, we're not going to ever forget, or we need to keep these statues and flags taxpayer funded, even though they represent a dark hour in America. And here's the other thing, man, and I'm so I'm so pissed that to this day in the state of Georgia, I'm literally paying for symbols that represent my own oppression. I am forced as a taxpayer to pay for symbols that represent the oppression, not only of me as a black man in America, but of my ancestors, because I'm talking about the government and powers that be, would like to give places of nobility and honor to those that dishonored people in my family. Now, let me go back to these Karens for a minute. They have now started, Cenk, to create commercials. They are now going on the safe haven for all things racist, Fox News. And here's their latest rant about critical race theory in K through 12 education.
Loudoun County, Virginia, where fed up parents there have launched a fiery new ad campaign calling out critical race theory in classrooms, aiming to oust 6 school board members who they say tried to target and silence them.
Infecting our schools with critical race theory, training teachers that Christians are oppressors. One school board member even endorsed an official committee to, quote, silence the opposition. Parents and teachers are fighting back. They're recalling the 6 school board members who stood by and did nothing while parents were targeted.
Yeah, and then these parents, Cenk, went on to say that they're not only targeting critical race theory, which once again is not even taught in K through 12 education. It is a fabricated pretext. They're saying that they want to eliminate critical theory, period. Now, critical theory is the examination of institutions through the lens of economic, social, and political power as it relates to race in America. They want to eliminate all critical thinking in the United States or in K through 12 education. Here's another, this is a family, a mixed race couple talking about what does this mean for them.
Are our kids, are they half oppressor, half victim? How does that work?
And when they come home, who do they see? Do they see their mom and their dad? Or do they see an oppressor and the oppressed?
I think they see 2 silly ass parents that don't understand. That's what I think. Now, the reality is this. CRT takes it away from the person and applies the analysis to the institution. Cenk, why do you think they are so afraid of looking at the cause and effect reality of the original sin of this country, which was slavery that produced systemic racism? Why are they afraid to look at that one reality and actually provide remedy for it?
Yeah, so that's a great question, and it's exactly what I wanted to go to, because they're taking it personal in a way that reveals their hand, right? If I was playing poker against them, I'd think, I know what cards you're holding. Because here, I'll give you a perfect example. It's my example. So I'm Turkish, which in America means almost nothing because there's very few of us, and so it's not a thing that's talked about much. My background is Muslim. I grew up Muslim, so we're a little oppressed here in America. In Germany, Turks are far more oppressed. They're a much larger minority and they suffer significant discrimination, right? On the other hand, in Turkey, the Turks are the majority and arguably do the oppression. Okay, and I don't think it's that arguable. And they've done it historically, certainly, of Kurds, Armenians, Greeks, you name it, right? So does that make me guilty? No, it isn't about you white folks. Let me try to calm your nerves a little bit, okay? It isn't about you unless you make it about you, unless you take offense at it. If Turks oppressed Kurds in the past or today, I didn't do it. I'm looking to change it. I'm looking to make it better. Okay, I'm looking to fix it because I believe that we can go towards progress.
Yeah.
But if you don't want to fix it and you think it's A-OK, that's when you would take it personally and feel like it's an attack against you. It isn't an attack against Christians or white folks that this is what happened in the past. It isn't an attack against me personally right now that Muslims in the Ottoman Empire did not treat non-Muslims equally. That's a fact. Even if you're offended by it, it's a fact. It's true, right? So that I give it to you in a different context so you can understand that history is history.
That's right.
And so when I see these folks acting out, one of the things I see, Rashad, is they also get that the winners write the history books. And they're now worried that we're going to have equality in this country and that we're going to be equal winners in that sense. And that is what is at the core of what bothers Fox News, and that's why they do all these stories, and the folks that are so riled up about teaching what is indisputably true.
Yeah, here's the example I give my college students, because some of them have trouble understanding the concept of equality versus equity. And I teach a lot of white students, brown students, and black students. And I always explain that equality is actually an illusion. It is an illusion because nothing is actually equal. You don't treat someone exactly the same. Nature does not produce equality. Everything has a slight difference no matter what. The goal should have never been equality, but actually equity. That should have been the goal. And here's the biggest difference. If you're playing in a football game, you have two evenly matched teams. Let's call that equality. And these two evenly matched teams, they have a very similar talent pool. And this talent pool, both sides are told all you got to do is play hard and you will win the game. Score more points than the other team and you win the game. And you have your crowd. Let's call that your independent media. And you engage in a good faith effort to actually win the game. It gets to the last quarter. You have 5 seconds left and you're up by 50 points. There is no way the opposition team can win. 1 second left in the game. You find out that the other team inherited 100 points before the game began. That is the difference between equality and equity. And the only way you resolve that problem is by going back to the core of why one team inherited 100 points and the other team had to start at 0.